Mary Balkin, Director of Faculty Development, and Chair of the English Department, and other things. So, we're delighted tonight to welcome Junius Williams here to Seton Hall University. I will not be doing the introduction, but I do want to mention a few things. First of all, there are some handouts on the table here, which have information on African American events and resources here at Seton Hall. Our library has a number of really interesting collections. And in fact, there is a display that's been up since February when this talk was originally scheduled on the Newark Uprising. And so if you go by the library in the in the archived area, there you are. First floor of Walsh Library, you'll see some of the materials that the university owns related to the Newark Uprising. There are some books for sale over here, and Mr. Williams has graciously agreed to sign books at the end of this talk. So I would like to introduce the person who will be introducing Mr. Williams, Dr. Peter Savastano, Associate Professor of Sociology, Anthropology, and Social Work.
Good evening. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a horrible insomniac. And when I can't sleep, one of the things that I do is I channel surf. So one night, I'd say about 8 months ago, I was channel surfing and I happened upon a TV show on NJTV out of Rutgers University called Due Process. And the guest on the show that night was Junius Williams, who was talking about his recently published memoir, Unfinished Agenda. 2 days later, I attended an advisory council meeting for the Center for Faculty Development, and Dr. Balkin said that she was looking for speakers, that she wanted very much for us to focus on teaching race in the classroom. And I immediately thought of Junius Williams, having just seen the show. But it's a little more complicated than that. I have only met Junius Williams once in my life. It was this past October. We were both having a bourgeois moment in the aisle of Whole Foods in Montclair, New Jersey. I don't remember if it was the cheese aisle or the cereal aisle. I just knew it was going to cost us both a lot of money. I had already spoken to him about coming to Seton Hall to talk to us. I introduced myself to him. That was the first time we have ever met in person. However, Junius Williams has been in my life since the 1960s. I was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey. I came of age in the 1960s. I was the product, for the most part, of Catholic school education. I attended a huge all-boys Catholic high school, which at the time was located in Newark. It is no longer there. And I, through a priest and a brother who taught us, I participated in a student group. It brought African American and white students together to talk about issues of race. It eventually evolved into something called uhuru, which is a Swahili word for freedom. And I just recently looked in the Essex Catholic yearbook from that year to find a picture of myself as part of that group and to discover something I had forgotten, which was that I was the vice president of the African American Students Organization called Uhuru. Something that was a possibility then and made sense then in the year 1968, but obviously does not make any sense now. So that sort of led to a career of activism, particularly around race-related issues, as well as around gender and sexuality issues eventually, and in and around the city of Newark. And also for many years I worked at what was at the time the University of Medicine and Dentistry, where Junius was serving on various committees around issues of human rights and social justice. So his name was absolutely everywhere. Two things that I learned, cliche as they are in all of my years of activism around these issues, was all politics is local, and think globally, act locally. I did my dissertation in Newark. Newark was the field site of that. It was around issues that had to do with race and sexuality and religion. And one of the things that really struck me was, in order to understand any of these social issues, whether it be race, gender, whatever the case may be, you really need to see how that is embodied in people's lives. And certainly that was something that I learned from my life in Newark and from also my academic work in Newark. And reading Junius Williams' memoir is certainly a testament to that in so many ways. I don't expect you to know all the players, but just the many different ways that my life has intersected with Junius. Reading through his memoirs, there are a whole cast of very important and interesting people, all who have worked in one way or another, with one or two exceptions, for issues of social justice around race. Perhaps he will mention some of them tonight. But if you want to know more about these people, I highly recommend that you read Unfinished Agenda. But I'd just like to name some of them, and perhaps these will be names that will be recognizable to you. These are people that have been in Junius's life as an activist and mine as well. So it's sort of a version of 6 degrees of separation. Clem Price, Amina Baraka, Elaine Brody, Louise Epperson, Rich Camerari, Mary Mathis Ford, Bob Mackover, Carla Lerman, George Hampton, and Anthony Imperiale. I have worked with most of these people. I have fought with one of them over the years. I'll leave it up to you to figure out who that one is. So it's a small world. It's a real world. It's a concrete world. So just a little of the official things about Junius Williams that I'd like to tell you. He's a nationally recognized attorney, musician, educator, and independent thinker who has been in the forefront of the civil rights and human rights movements in this country for decades. His life in the movement in the South and the North has been chronicled in the Civil Rights History Project, a collaborative initiative of the Library of Congress and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Smithsonian Institution. He is one of 11 interviews. His is one of 11 interviews shown nationally on C-SPAN. His speeches have energized young and old alike in places like the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York, Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, New Jersey, and colleges throughout the country. As the youngest president of the National Bar Association, the oldest and largest organization of black attorneys in the U.S., he spoke at the United Nations advocating for genuine democracy on behalf of the people of Zimbabwe, South Africa. He was listed as one of the 100 most influential blacks in America in Ebony magazine. He ran for mayor of Newark. He may be counting his blessings that he wasn't elected. And now teaches leadership and community organization at Rutgers University, Newark, based on lessons outlined in his new book, Unfinished Agenda, Urban Politics in the Era of Black Power. As if that wasn't enough, he sings and plays blues harmonica and celebrates with audiences the rich cultural heritage of African American music. From the Negro spirituals, blues, jazz, and gospel to hip hop. The common thread in this rich life shared in his speeches is his passion for justice. Junius Williams uses stories, candid commentary, humor, and his music to inspire and empower his audiences. He takes his listeners from the civil rights movement in the South to the Black Power movement in the North, from the election of the first black mayors to current multiracial urban leadership. He challenges his audiences to understand the causes behind youth violence, the myth behind the war on drugs, and school reform that benefits some but not all. Are you listening, Betsy DeVos? Junius Williams is a dynamic speaker who inspires diverse audiences to think and grow taller by considering a new paradigm for solving urban problems. I should also say that most recently, he served as the chairman of the Newark Celebration 350, and this past October, he put on a 2-day conference in anticipation of the upcoming 50th anniversary of the 1967 uprising in Newark. The title of his talk tonight, unless he's changed it, is Race and the Presidency, Donald Trump and New Lessons for the Academy. And it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Junius Williams.
Good evening. Good evening, sir. I want to thank Peter Savastino for inviting me, and I want to thank Dr. Balkan for having me. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be here. I must say that life is full of surprises because me being accused of a bourgeois moment at Fresh Fields is just as unlikely as Peter Savastino being vice president of the Black Organization. But things do happen, don't they? A shadow, though. So, yeah, that was old folks. We got that. We got that. Y'all don't know nothing about the shadow, do you? How many of y'all know about the shadow? Oh, a few. Yeah, no, all of us are over 50. Okay. The shadow. So I am going to challenge you today in some of those areas that he mentioned, but it's going to be a challenge just understanding race and the presidency. But I think you're up to it. I almost feel like giving one of those warnings you see on television before you watch this. There may be some things that you do not want to hear. So if you think you might feel like that, I don't mind leaving now. Okay, so you got the blurb on the book. That's mighty nice of them to have some books here for sale. I also noticed that they have in here that you can get the book at the library. No author wants to hear that. So here's the book and some cards if you want to pick the book up and get them later. Get it later on yourself, by yourself. It's on randomhouse.com. And see, the thing about living an improvised life, which is what I have lived, there's no script. I've reinvented myself many times, and that's a message I give to young people all over. You got to be prepared, not for that steady, good job, living in the suburbs, 2 cars, 2.5 children. It's not going to happen unless you learn how to reinvent yourself. But that's another speech. Have me back. And I'll talk to you about that. But my latest passion under my most recent invention as that of historian and researcher is a website called riseupnorth.com. I have some cards up here, you can get it. Rise Up North is one word, RISEUPNORTH. And it is a history of the Black empowerment movement in Newark. Comes under the banner of a project I call The North, Civil Rights and Beyond in Urban America. And Newark happens to be the first city where we're looking at just how did black people get some power? You notice I did not say black power, because people think of that as some kind of slogan. I said the Black empowerment process. And I also include in this how other people in other ethnic groups have looked at power in Newark, whether you're Italian, whether you're Irish, whether you're Chinese. Everybody has an opportunity to look at power and dream of becoming empowered, because power gets things done. So here's our beginning. We're going to go to Detroit, we're going to go to Oakland, Chicago, Philadelphia, as many cities in the north as there is money to take us. Somebody said, well, how do you define the north? I say, anything that's not in the south. So here we are in the north, and I'm going to talk to you about race in the presidency. So to start that out, and by the way, questions, I will appreciate questions. I'm going to try to do something here that you all can appreciate in as little time as possible, and then we're going to move right into questions because I want to hear what you have to say, questions and comments. But first, let's take a look at the Obama presidency. I want to establish a few rules as we go along. Rule number 1 about race and racism. Race, as hopefully all of you know, is an artificial construct. There is no such thing biologically as race. We all are the same within a few variations allowed by the human genotype. Different hair, different eyes, different skin color. And even that can be traced from the trek of humankind from Mother Africa into other parts of the world. Anybody got any problem with that? Okay, I see. This is Seton Hall. That's elementary. Everybody knows that. Okay, I didn't know that when I was sitting in your seat at some university many years ago. Race is an artificial concept. It's designed by one group to make another group look inferior. So you've got the inferior group and you've got the superior group. And it all started with slavery. Slavery had to be justified some kind of way by Christians coming out of Europe. And so let's just look at pinpoint it if we can, because this is very important. The Moors had conquered Spain and Portugal. And in 1492, the people rose up and threw the Moors out. Now the Moors were from Africa and from Asia. You had what they call black Moors and you had tawny Moors. And it didn't really matter to the people who were Moors, and the people in Europe didn't think about them as black or tan. They just thought of them as conquerors, and we got to get them out. And they did in 1492. Now something else happened in 1492. Some scholars tell me what great international conquest or what great international event took place in that year.
Discovery of the Americas.
Who said that? All right, discovery of the Americas. I'll give you Americas. Discover, no. Columbus came to America. Columbus fell into America. He was lost. He was a great seaman, but he didn't discover nothing. Will you go that far with me? All right. But that is correct, sir. If you were a student, I would give you a free book. But since you're not, so to justify the enslavement of the African people, which came just a step later, to justify the taking of the land from the Native Americans and the decimation of their culture, they had to say these people were inferior. And that's how race started. And then because they couldn't enslave the Native Americans too easily, because of European disease, they had to bring in the Africans, and that's how African slavery got its hold in the so-called New World. Now, it was just more than an idea that came out of that whole process, because slavery was institutionalized. The taking of the land from the Native Americans was institutionalized. And so racism became more than just an idea that was situated in some unfortunate people's mind. Because you see, the bank started and got a hold in America, the United States and other parts, because they were lending money for these trips to go out and get those slaves. So the banking industry was based upon racism. The insurance industry of the United States formed because these ships, these stalwart sailors who were going around the world to pick up all this cargo, this black gold, they had to be insured. Therefore, the insurance companies based upon racism and exploitation. You had other companies as well. Of course, you had the engineers, you had the lawyers, eventually you had the governments who were founded upon ordering some people around, putting people in jail, making sure they worked or didn't work the way they were supposed to. So the whole country is saturated with a history of racism. That's when y'all start looking sad, looking all down and everything. Don't think about it, because I'm going somewhere. These are just definitions, if you will. The second rule, gold and sex and racism are the three greatest reasons explaining why people are blinded to their own self-interest. Maybe you can think of some others. Gold, sex, racism make you just act like a fool. Act like a fool. And I certainly have personal experiences toward that end, and you probably do as well, either as participants in that whole process or looking at what other people are doing. So I want you to keep those two truths in mind as we go forward. So when Barack Obama was elected, he and his people engineered a monumental achievement in the American political culture. He was the first African American elected to be the president of the United States of America, right? But there was another big achievement, because you see, he was elected president of the United States with less than a white majority. Less than a white majority. Most of the white people voted against him. 34% of the white people voted for him in 2008 and 31% in 2012. Never been done before at that level. Now, how did he do this? In the states he needed most to win the electoral college majority, he won with great certainty. He had an overwhelming turnout of blacks, Latinos, Asians, and whites, mostly young, to do what needed to be done, and he won the popular vote nationally with the same kind of format. Could you think of what would happen if Barack Obama didn't win the popular vote as well as the electoral college? Can you imagine what would have happened? I see heads shaking. I can't imagine either. I don't think he would have been allowed to serve. So here we must come to fundamental rule number 3. When black people get elected to any kind of significant public office, they change the rules. They change the rules. Let me give you a little example, and it's spelled out in my book. I was Ken Gibson's first campaign manager. Ken Gibson was the first African-American mayor of the city of Newark. I was his first campaign manager, as I said, and I served in his administration. When Ken Gibson became mayor, the power in City Hall was moved to the county and to the state. Being mayor no longer meant what it used to be. People who lived in the suburbs determined Newark's future. By and large, there were some things. Likewise, when President Obama was elected, there was an all-out assault upon him personally and upon the office of the president. Look at the so-called birther movement. People up to this day swear he was not born in the United States of America. The man was born in Hawaii. Everybody knows that by now. Even Donald Trump admitted, okay, yeah, he was born here. After he had used that as a platform to gain attention from certain people. Look how this issue was played out with Obama as opposed to the case of Senator John McClain, because I think he was born in Panama. Two American parents, citizen of the United States. Nobody. You didn't even know that, did you? But you might have probably voted for him to become president if you were voting at that time. Maybe not. But never became an issue. But with the black president, it consumed so much airtime and so much emotion and so much vitriol and so much anger was put into that whole process. Then he was accused of being a Muslim. Now note the juxtaposition of the two words, accused of being a Muslim. So what if he was a Muslim? But he isn't. But airtime, he's not really a Christian, he's a Muslim. So you see how that whole juxtaposition has pushed out the whole possibility that anybody who is a Muslim can really be a good American citizen. And we see that played out more and more each day. You're not going to talk about, but you know what I'm talking about. So the Republican Party, this is item number 3 as proof from my assertion. The Republican Party became not the party in opposition, but the party dedicated, organized to shut down government at the national level. Never heard of that before. The Democrats had been out and they raised questions, but nobody tried to shut down the government. They did it 2 times. Wouldn't vote for the money to keep the government going. I had friends in Washington who stayed home. And finally, and probably the most obvious impact of race on the presidency, when it came to the first black president, President Obama had more threats upon his life than any other sitting president ever in the history of the United States of America. Now, put in this position, President Obama's supporters rallied around him. He's our president, right or wrong. It came down to, you got to give him a chance. So if President Obama didn't do something that I thought he would do, should have been doing, my friends were saying, he couldn't do it, he couldn't do it. The Congress is not with him. He's trying. It's outnumbered. We got to give him a chance to get the job done. This was especially true for black people, but not just black people. They say he was a victim and not really given a chance to become and be the president of the United States of America as he wanted to be. Here's another telltale kind of symbol, something emblematic of maybe what's going on in the mind of a lot of black people. We see ourselves as victims. We play the role of victim better than anybody else. And so we projected that role upon the president instead of seeing him for what he was. The most powerful man individually in the world today. President of the United States. So therefore, it is my contention that he was not without the means to strike back. In fact, to take the initiative to get some of his programs done. He needed to play to his strength. And what was his strength? His strength was that he had the greatest list. They probably don't call them this anymore, but what we call them Rolodex. You know, where you keep your card, your business card. You don't know anything about Rolodex? Anybody, who in here has a Rolodex? The same people, raise their hand. He had the best Rolodex in the history of the White House. All those people, that new, remember that new majority, made up of people like you and me, all kinds of colors. I love this room right here. It's a great combination of colors and cultures in here. That's the kind of thing he had at his disposal. He could have said, go out and take the Republicans on and get me a single health plan, get me a single payer health plan. He could have said, go out and take on the Republicans and let's do a jobs program. Let's do prison reform and let's work for a world without war. But he didn't do all of that. We're going to come to some of the things he did do toward the end of my speech, but he didn't do most of the things that I said I thought he should do. He didn't do that. He didn't call out the army that he had at his disposal, and that's because he obviously didn't read my book. Y'all supposed to that was funny. Y'all supposed to laugh. Unfinished Agenda, Urban Politics in the Age of Black Power, where I tell the reader that the key to success for black elected officials, especially, is to combine the power in the suites with the power in the streets. The power in the suite, where he is, with the power in the street, where we are. Obama had the power of the executive order, plus the bully pulpit, plus the power of the purse, plus a gigantic police force called the Army, fantastic intelligence. His constituency, this new majority, were ready to move in the streets should he have asked them to do so. Let's examine that last statement, move in the streets. What do I mean? Ready to riot? No. Demonstrate? Selectively, yes. Lobby? Most definitely. Put the spotlight on senators and congressmen and women? Definitely, yes. And ultimately, to go for their jobs. To go for their jobs. Do what the Democratic Party had failed to do for so long, studying what the Republicans had done so well, looking at that system that they had built to control the electoral process at the national, state, and local level. Let's go to history to see what I mean. Back in 1965, this is the year of the passage of the Voter Rights Act. Black people couldn't vote in certain places in the country, mostly in the South, some places in the North as well. But about 10 states in the South just wouldn't let black people vote. In Alabama, there were maybe 1-2% of people who were eligible to vote were in fact allowed to vote. I went to jail in the state of Alabama. I went to state prison in the state of Alabama for the right of black people to vote. It was because of people like me. My little part was relatively small, but because of people who played a great role in that movement called the Civil Rights Movement, and organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, organizations like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, the NAACP, all of these organizations, and so many more, because of the pressure that was put on Congress and the president, who was Johnson at that time, this law was passed. And what it did, it brought the federal government in the front, because any scheme that was brought forth by these particular states had to be judged legal or illegal, and the federal government could do it before you went to court. And that made a lot of difference. That section of the law, that section 4 of the law, has been subsequently struck down. It has been subsequently struck down by the Supreme Court in 2014, I believe. And sure enough, southern states started coming back with all kinds of schemes to keep black people from voting, and brown people, as a matter of fact. As more and more immigrants come to this country. And I'm going to tell you why that's so important to them in a minute. But when that happened, most of the people who had been voting Democrats all of their lives in the South went over to the Republican Party. You all look at the charts now, and you see the voting going on, and you see the red states and the blue states, and all of those southern states now are red. But up until 1965, they were blue. Race and the presidency. Nixon won. Lyndon Johnson didn't run for a second term. He was the vice president under Kennedy, served that term out, ran another term. I believe he didn't run because of the Vietnam War. People were on him about that, and he knew he couldn't probably even take Texas, his own state, anymore. So rather than go through that, he said, I'm not running again. So, Republicans won. Richard Nixon came in and started rolling back all the successes that black people had earned with the help from their friends. That's another story, but I want to start somewhere to talk to you about the impact of race in the presidency. They couldn't stand the fact that black people were going to be able to vote, so they left the party that they'd been a part of for 100 years since slavery, since the end of slavery. Now here's, what did they do? I gave you a little hint there. Richard Nixon came along. If somebody could get me some water, I'd appreciate it. I'm going to talk to you about some of the strategies that they used during this period. And one of the strategies is called the 15% solution. This is from an article published in The Nation, reprinted from The Voice, April 6, 1993, how the Christian right is building from below to take over from above. What it says in so many words is that the Christian right, resentful of big government, resentful of the Democrats, resentful of black people's so-called gains, the Christian right reinvented itself with some familiar faces and started building from the bottom up. They started running people for school boards. They started running people for election committees. Most importantly, they ran people for state legislative positions. They control the people, they control the organizations, they control the state legislature where decisions were made about who could vote, the conditions under which they would vote, and the districts in which they would vote in. This all became a part of the Christian right. They have such people as Pat Robinson's Christian Coalition with $13 million to annually dole out to hand-picked candidates and causes, all of it wired into his Christian broadcast network audience of 16 million people. Paul Wayrich's Free Congress Foundation beaming marching orders along its closed-circuit national empowerment television to 65 far-flung satellite dish affiliates in more than 30 states. This is what was going on back in the 70s, late 70s, and the early 1980s. Coming forward, what was the formula? Well, they said if 15% of the people vote, even in a well-attended presidential election, only 15% of the eligible voters determine the outcome. Here's a simple math. About 60% of the qualified electorate is registered, and only half of them vote. Half again of that 30% determines the outcome, hence the all-powerful 50%. So if you have a well-organized, well-oriented, ideologically together group of people who compose 15%, you win the elections. So they began taking over the Republican Party at the lower levels and winning these small elections, while a lot of people were staying home looking at television. You don't have to worry about us convincing a majority of Americans to agree with us. Guy Rogers, the Christian Coalition's National Field Director, declared at the 1991 Road to Victory Conference, most of them are staying home and watching Falcon Crest. That was a popular program at that time. How many of y'all remember Falcon Crest? Same people. Same people. I didn't get any surprises on that. I wish I had a camera here to show you what Paul Wayrich said, one of the leaders of the conservative group. There's a video of him that I show my class sometime, and I should have just asked for just that one opportunity to show that one slide. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down. Are you hearing that? Are you hearing that? As the voting population goes down, we in the conservative causes, we in the Republican Party, which is the home of this kind of thinking, we are the winners. So, you have to understand who these people are. The Christian right, are they really what they say they are? Just looking at issues of morality, such as anti-abortion, things such as that. According to its own creation myth, this is from an article in the New Republic, March 20th, 2017. According to its own creation myth, evangelicals rose up and began to organize in opposition to Roe versus Wade, motivated by their duty to protect the unborn. Albert Mohler, a prominent Southern Baptist theologian, described Roe as a catalyst for the moral revolution within evangelicalism. The moment that spurred the coalition with conservative Catholics that still undergirds the religious right. In fact, Sarah Posner says, it wasn't abortion that sparked the creation of the religious right. The movement was actually galvanized in the 1970s and early 80s when the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, revoked the tax-exempt status of Bob Jones University and other conservative Christian schools that refuse to admit non-whites. Race, thank you, Clarence. Race again rears its ugly head. Racism, I should say. By openly embracing the racism of the alternative right, called the alt-right, Donald Trump, fast forwarding ahead, effectively played to religious rights' own roots in white supremacy. Richard Spencer, president of the National Policy Institute and the alt-right's most visible spokesman, argued during the campaign that GOP voters aren't really motivated by Christian values as they profess, but rather by deep racial anxieties. Trump has shown the hand of the GOP. Spencer told me in September, the GOP is a white person's populist party. I didn't say that. Richard Spencer did. Rule number 4, racism is a fuel used by some to stoke a never-ending fire burning inside America. I did say that. There's no way of knowing how many Americans consider themselves to be alt-right or Christian evangelists or a possible combination about. But it is clear that the Christian right has a lockhold on the small level local organizations that produce votes. And that's what Trump wanted, that's what Trump needed. Now, there are more people on the alternative right than the Christian Coalition, and I'm not just picking on them. They happen to be ones who started something long ago, and it was picked up on by some very, very important people. How many of you ever heard of the Koch brothers? That's good. Got more hands than just the usual suspects on that way. Because now we come to the money part. You gotta add in, you gotta factor in the issue of money when you're talking about this racial impetus that led Trump to victory and led to Mr. Obama's particular problems that he had when he was running the country. How did the Republicans specifically pull off this whole victory without money? And they couldn't have. Back in 1976, if you want to learn something about the Koch brothers or any of these other people that I'm about to talk about, here's a great book that you should go and get. It's called Dark Money by Jane Mayer. Dark Money by Jane Mayer. You want to see who is really behind these mysterious funding sources. You want to see about some of the philanthropy, the so-called philanthropy that's out there. If you want to see who's funding people like the Christian coalitions and the Tea Party, you want to learn all about that. I'm just going to give you a little bit to whet your appetite. But let's talk about the Koch brothers. There were 4 Koch brothers, by the way. The story goes that 2 of them bullied the other 2 out. They bought them out, but they bullied them out. I'm not an expert on that. In the 1960s, Charles Koch had funded the all-white private freedom school in Colorado. David Koch echoed specious claims made by the conservative gadfly Dinesh D'Souza that Obama was somehow African rather than American in his outlook. He claimed that Obama, who was born in America and abandoned by his Kenyan father as a toddler, that's her language, not mine, nonetheless derived his radical views, quote unquote radical, from his African heritage. Some of the things the Koch brothers have done, they have their organization, Koch's political organization, primary, is called Americans for Prosperity. based in the South, in Austin, Texas, at one of their meetings during the summer of 2010. Between Tea Party training sessions, operatives working for the Kochs gave an award to a blogger who had described Obama as the, quote, cokehead in chief, end quote, and asserted that he suffered from demonic possession. They gave him an award. Then there was something called the Center to Protect Patient Rights, which had all kinds of videos showing that the government was taking over health care. This was to keep the Obamacare legislation from being passed. And they brought out posters, protesters unfurled banners depicting corpses from Dachau, implying that Obama's policies would result in mass murder. They paid for screaming protesters in town hall meetings at which congressmen met with constituents that year. In short, during the Obama years, the Kochs radicalized and organized an unruly movement of malcontents over which by 2016 they had lost control. Now, if you want to study this, you see that at first the Kochs were not in favor of Donald Trump. They were not still. But as the report in this book shows, Dark One shows, they created a monster. They just wanted some groups who were going to go around and talk about, let's lower the taxes so business people can make some more money. Let's have free trade. This was all reflected in their agenda. You want to privatize education. You want to privatize as much as government as you can. They didn't care how they did it, so they played ball with the crazies. Whether they believe some of this stuff I just talked about or not, I don't know. It doesn't matter. They were part of it. It was institutionalized racism. But Donald Trump came along and saw a vacuum because he knew the people generally were not in favor of some of the things that the Koch brothers and their friends were talking about, like sending jobs overseas. They didn't think that the rich should get socked for fewer taxes. So Donald Trump stepped in and using his own money, he took over the rhetoric of populism. I'm for you, I'm for you, little guy. I am against the big guy. Remember all those things he was saying? I'm for you, I want to make America great again. And he got all of that support. Now the Koch brothers have to live with him and all the other big shots in the Republican Party. But Donald Trump, realizing that he can't make it without the Republicans, look at who he has put into his cabinet. Billionaires and millionaires. Peter mentioned Ms. DeVos. I think she's probably related to the DeVos family. These are some of the people that the Koch brothers play ball with. In addition to the Koch, this group includes Richard Mellon Scaife, an heir to the Mellon banking and Gulf oil fortune, Harry and Lynn Bradley, Midwesterners enriched by defense contracts, John M. Olin, a chemical and munitions company titan. You see the Olin advertisements on television for the machines that they built. The Coors Brewing family of Colorado, I hope y'all don't think Coors beer. And the DeVos family of Michigan, founders of the Amway marketing empire. I believe Betsy DeVos is one of those. That's who he's got in his campaign. That's who he's got in his cabinet. So he has come around. Now, let me, in 5 more minutes, I'm going to let you talk to me some of this. You might be saying, well, why is this so important? This was an article in the Washington Post. And it was done, I don't have a date here. Oh, here it is, January 14th, 2015. Everyone knows by now that 2010 and 2014 were very good to the Republican Party. This was before, of course, the most recent recent election. What they don't understand, or don't understand well enough, is just how good. Republicans control the Senate and have their largest majority in the House of Representatives since World War II, that's at the national level. But it's down ballot, way down ballot, where the depth of the Republican victories over the past 3 elections truly reveals themselves, and where the impact will be felt over the long term. Now, why is this author pointing this out? Let me just give you a comparative analysis here. During the years of 2010, 2014, this is what happened to the Democratic Party while Obama was the president. U.S. Senate seats lost, 13. House seats lost, 69. Governors, 11. State legislative seats, that's Senate, Assembly, or combination where you only have one, like in Kansas, I believe, 913. 913 seats changed from Democrat to Republican. Now, why is that so important, young people, you say? Because you're interested in Black Lives Matter and you want to be demonstrating in the street when things go wrong. Well, let me tell you why this lopsided state legislative control matters to national politics. This lopsided set of events created by the Kochs, created by the Christian evangelicals, financed by the Betsy DeVos's, etc. While everybody was singing Happy Days Are Here Again in Washington on the Clinton watch and more recently on the Obama watch, this is what happened. Policy is made, this is number one, policy is made at the state legislative level. That policy pertaining to states and policy that gets bumped up to the federal level. With Republicans in control of so many state governments, the policy incubator for their side will be vastly superior to that of Democrats. Number two, state legislatures and governors redraw congressional lines. This is what I want you to understand, young people. This is what I want you to understand. You say voting is not so important. State legislators and governors redraw congressional lines. In most states, how the nation's 435 House districts will look after the 2020 census will be determined by state legislators and governors. And guess what? Y'all supposed to say what? I'm gonna ask you again. Guess what? Republican legislators and governors are more likely to draw lines that are friendly to their side. Well, that's not so surprising. What does that mean? If you've got a square here and the Republican, this is let's say this is state X, and you've got 4 divisions and you just make them look like rectangles inside that square, right? What if you move the line a little bit and you jagged it, raise it so much so that only the people in the neighborhoods where the Republicans live got the majority of the people in that one particular district? Where you used to maybe win 2 out of the 4, you might be able to win 3 out of the 4 because you changed the line to include the Republicans. Neighborhood where you knew the Republicans were going to be as opposed to where the Democrats are going to be. Now, this used to be the kind of thing that the Voting Rights Act prohibited, and the government, the federal government, could jump in and say, no, we know what you're doing. You gerrymandered this thing. But remember I told you, Section 4 is no longer a part of the law because the Supreme Court decided that's not really constitutional anymore. It's not needed anymore. So the Republicans have locked themselves in for a long time to come. Finally, state legislators are the minor league. Most of the politicians, President Obama included, who had gone on to great things politically speaking, honed their craft in the state legislature of their home. In other words, it's the place where they are producing people who understand government. Young people like yourself are getting elected to office as Republicans and not as Democrats. You don't see so much of an impact of that right now, but as time goes by, we will see that. So let's go back to Obama in my conclusion. What did Obama do? Still talking about race and the impact on the White House. In my opinion, Obama did not, as I already stated, he did not call out the troops when necessary. Obama was somewhat timid in areas where he could have been more forceful. Health care, but with the cost going up, the health care law is really not going to be as good as it could have been had there been more muscle behind it. Jobs, well, he came out with a job-saving set of money that kept the auto industry from folding. That was good. But most of the jobs that are now being produced in this economy are low-paying jobs. You can't earn a living on just having one job. War. The United States of America is at war in 5 Muslim countries. You may not think that because they're only using drones, but the people over there think about it. I heard a man on, not NPR, on Amy Goodman's show this morning being interviewed. His wife was killed in the United States air raid. His daughter was killed. His son was killed. His brother's family was killed. And he was wondering, how is he still alive? I offer that to show that there was somewhat of there was a lot of things that could have been done to strengthen the Democratic Party within the Obama administration. Having Hillary Clinton as a candidate was probably not the best thing to do. Bernie Sanders would have been better. But with the lock on the political apparatus that so many of the people that I've talked about have at the local level, we're in for a long ride. And that's where you come in. Because as I see your faces, not so bright as when I came in the room, because I've given you a hard talk. Not so shiny, but very, very inquisitive, because most of you have listened to what I've said. And I think if you apply the skills that you have, you can begin to say to your parents, this is no longer your country. This is ours. And we're going to play the game by a different set of rules. And you know what? You're supposed to say what? That's just what I hope you do. Thank you very much. Any questions? Comments? Yes, sir.
I have a comment mixed in with a question. I'll grant you that you're partially right in your assessments, but I think part of the issue, the big issue, is not only racism, but it's just the American psyche. Barack Obama, I mean, you disparaged a few things there. He was a global citizen, not only an American, and he understood, and I think educated Americans or educated people in general understand that we make up about 5% of the human population of about 7 billion people on the planet Earth. And what Donald Trump has done is he's trumped this, he's pushed this American psyche of we're number one, we're the best, we're what matter, we're the biggest game in town. we are the best, and then this is what he has basically actioned and caused to in mass to move forward. The realization that there aren't other people in this world except Americans. I mean, when you look at Americans and LeBron James is playing in the NBA Finals, and you're Cleveland Cavalier fans, there are no racists there. If you're a Cavaliers fan or a Knicks fan or whatever it might be, I think it only becomes selective at the local level, and that's part of the problem. I mean, Peter talks a lot about the local level, but that's a lot, and as you have, but that's part of the problem, that we think so locally, so restrictively in our thinking of, oh, I only matter my group of people, the black population or the Hispanic population or the white population, while the rest of the world, like you said, there's many varieties of colors. And I think Barack Obama, to his credit, understood that, probably because of the way he grew up, where his father was Nigerian and then his stepfather was Indonesian, and he spent part of his life growing up around the world and realizing that there's other people outside these borders. So my question to you is, can you comment on that? I mean, racism is part of the equation, I grant you that, of humanity's problems, but it's not, in my opinion, as big as you've made it.
Okay, well, just to start with your comment about LeBron James, if we were all playing basketball and the rules were set by the NBA, then you might be right. But the rules are not set by the NBA. So we have to look at who does make the rules.
America.
Okay.
Globally.
Well, who within America has the power right now? And the point I was making is that the political right has more power than the political left. And there are reasons for that. So what I'm trying to get people to see is that we have to look at the long haul. We have to play the long game, just like the Republicans do, just like the Koch brothers did, just like the evangelical right did. We have to play the long game. It doesn't help us if all we do is to sit around and say we are all in the world together and let's sing, the world song together. It doesn't do that. We got to get some power. So I'm trying to give, especially to these young people, a prescription for what you got to do. And what you got to do is to look and see that race plays a tremendous role. Race is what these people use to stoke the fire. Remember I said racism can make you do things that are not in your interest? All those people who were jumping up and down against the health care bill when it was a bill, but now don't want to let it go because they were realizing they get some health care, who are challenging the Republicans and say, well, what you got for me? Which is what they should have said a long time ago before they put this guy in. That's what I'm talking about. Racism is so easily manipulated, and if you're not forearmed, you may. There may be some people right in this room who voted for Trump. Maybe. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. I don't care if you did. I hope you're going to see more things like that coming forward. But if you don't know about it, you don't really know what to do. I think President Obama was a great guy. I just say that there's a double side of the thing, and his legacy could have been so much better had he been a stronger person and invited us in to play the hand for him.
But he didn't isolate us as Donald Trump is doing. He's creating, vintage, early 20th century isolationism against the rest of humanity.
Well,
against the 95% of the rest of the world.
Okay, no, I'm talking about the people who were in supporting President Obama. Should have been given a more of a prescribed role to help fight and do the things that you done, open up people's eyes. But if the leader doesn't define the terms of struggle, the people don't know what to do. I've heard all kinds of people say, well, we should have done something, Well, there were people trying to do things. Black Lives Matter. People were saying, let's do more. Health folks, nurses groups, doctors groups were saying, the health care law is not really as good as people say it is. Sure, you brought 21 million in, but there's still 20 million people left out. And now there's gonna be 40 million more on top of that if Trump has his way. This is not rocket science, people knew this. So if all of that had been encompassed, all of that power had been encompassed, power from the street, and combined with the power of the suite, we wouldn't be in the position we're in now. Yes?
I'm a little confused because at the end I couldn't really get the point like that you're trying to make. Like we talk a lot about the past, but the past is already done. We don't live in a segregation. The Jim law is already over. We have other issues right now, and I don't think like just talking about what happened, what shouldn't be like that's not gonna really solve anything. But what can we do from now on so everybody can be American, because we might be different, but we all the same, but at the same time, we just feel like we're just talking about racism, like, we're just separated, we're not really talking about how to get together.
Well, if you think that racism is only manifest by Jim Crow laws and a rigid line, hear me out.
But I feel like we're just going back to like that, we don't get over it.
Okay, well, hear me out. There's a statement, an old saying, that those who do not know their past are doomed to repeat it in the future. You have to know your history. Americans are the most ahistorical people on the planet. I'm looking at all the different nationalities around here, and I'm seeing people who are non-white nodding their heads in agreement with me. Because they come from cultures where history is important, so that you know where you're going. You gotta know your history so that you can plan to go into the future. That's the important thing. Now, let me correct you. When you said we're all together, that all of that's gone in the past, this was all in the past. It's not in the past. That's the point. It just may have a different look. It may have a different look. I don't go to Seton Hall, but I bet you a lot of the black kids sit at the table at the luncheon together. Can I get a witness? Must be a reason. Must be a reason for that. And I bet the Indians from continental India, and I bet the Chinese and the Koreans did some of the same thing. What has happened in America is that we have morphed into a different cycle where racism has now taken on some of the trappings of liberal politics. But the underlying factor that was always there and still there today is privilege. Privilege. And whites have privilege that black people and other people of color don't have. Now, does that mean that all white people are bad? No. Does that mean that all white people think they're privileged? No, because some white people have done the work. It takes work. If you do the work, you can get rid of that. You're willing to share, you do that. Black people, on the other hand, and I don't know about the other nationalities and the other cultures as well, black people have to do the work too, because we still think of ourselves as inferior. A lot of people do. Don't have time to go into all of that, but what is still going on in America was what was going on back when Christopher Columbus came and said, I took an Indian. So that's why it's important for us to go in. So I tried to map out how these things are affecting us now as opposed to then. And one of the reasons, most important reason that we have Donald Trump today is because of the manipulation of all of these factors, chief among them race. Can't say it was class, because class, he appealed to a lot of different classes. Some great big number, I don't know what it was, but I don't know that the educated white women that voted for Donald Trump is a big number. What proportion? 53%. It blew my mind.
That's crazy.
So you gotta go, yeah, who are they? You gotta go through this stuff to try to figure out what's going on. I would like to hear somebody's explanation of that. What happened with the women? What happened with some of the Latinos? Well, are you Latino?
Yes.
Yeah, where from? What's your nationality? Dominican Republic. Okay. So, I mean, all of these things are important, and you gotta just kind of go through them, and it takes time, and you gotta try to understand. Does that help some?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
So I have two quick comments, and one is, if you don't mind.
No, I don't want you to do that. Just make your first comment.
Well, the comment is just because, a lot of the things that are happening now are happening in an age group that is 20-year-old and 30-year-old. So when people talk about racism changing, like I used to think it was when I was younger, it's because the parent teaches the child. So even though you think of racism as from older group of people, it's first in the house. So that's why we have 20-year-olds doing swastikas on walls and things of that nature. And that's why we still, so that's all I wanted to say about it.
Okay, well, that's true. People, and that's why I said it's your country now.
Right.
You can't go by the rules set up by your parents. Somebody else had their hand up right here. Yes.
Well, I was going to be, like, trying to answer your question on why women will be for charge.
Okay.
And, I spoke to, I spoke to a couple of Hispanic women, and
Hold on one second. I don't want y'all to run out of here and think I don't want you to buy my book.
Is anybody planning
Just
to
playing.
buy a book?
Does anybody like to buy a book? Because I'm getting ready to leave.
Yes, she's a little over.
Okay, books. I'd be remiss in my duty if I didn't say books. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry, young lady.
so, mostly what I heard was that, I asked them, why did you vote for a man, or why did you agree with some of the things that they were saying when you said on national television would rather fight for you know what? And I've asked them, like, since so many misogynistic things about women, and a lot of the women that I talked to, a lot, granted they were a bit older, but they said that, that's a guy's mentality. And they kind of dismissed it part. And even my grandmother, who was a huge President Obama fan, and who voted for Hillary, she even dismissed that part. I said, how can you dismiss that misogynistic part? And she said, well, that's just the mentality that they have, and, you know, you can't get upset over everything.
Okay.
So, that was a comment that I had.
All right.
I think that it's
I
like, what to
appreciate
do,
that.
like, letting certain things slide, and even like the new culture, when it comes to gender relations.
And that's important. I'm gonna cut you off right now because I see people getting ready to leave. But that's it. People don't put all of these things into the basket when they're looking at power. But you need to have it in there. You need to have, if that man would do the things that he did, and there's still people suing him, and now he's saying he can't be sued because he's president, people would actually accuse him of attacking them. If you don't put that into your power equation, and you just say, well, that's just the way men are, you're gonna end up with somebody like Donald Trump who's gonna do other things which you do object to. So I appreciate that. I'm glad you realize that, and I hope a lot of other young ladies in here realize that about men in general. You just can't just push those things aside. That's a warning. That's a light bulb. I gotta stop.
Ask them, is that okay with them?
Yeah, is that okay with you? How many of you think that's okay? All right, those are the answers. Most of them said no. All right, any more questions? How many more questions can we have?
I don't know.
I
Who
have
else?
one. I have one.
Yeah.
So recently there's been a lot of discussion about how major news outlets handle candidates or advocates for the Republican Party and the alternate right. And people are saying, you know, if you pass these people on, if you hear them, you hear the rhetoric they're using, you're giving them a platform. And so So I'd like to know what are your thoughts on that. If you have people introduce the ideas, is that giving those platform, or is that a way to inform yourself so you know not to vote for these people or not to fall into the trap of believing anything they say?
Okay, well, that's a good question, because even though the press at this level where we see it, you see the talking heads on television and they just kind of shake their head when they say Donald Trump. The press is owned by some of these people that I named. NBC, CBS, they are in the book, or they should be. Now the way that the second thing you say would be true is if there was some real cross-examination of these candidates, not just Trump. But to do that, you got to get people on staff who know what they're talking about. But if you don't know the question to ask somebody, if you don't know how to pin them down, they're going to just get that free publicity that you said. When Donald Trump was running for president, especially in the primaries, he spent very little money on advertisement because the press was doing it all for him. The press, I remember one comparison. They were waiting for Donald Trump to come to some gathering that he was going to have, and 6 or 7 people were talking about Donald Trump, and he hadn't even arrived. Where out on the West Coast, Bernie Sanders had 20,000 people listening to what he was saying. And he got no play. He got very little play compared with Donald Trump. Now, if they were going to be fair and really let people see and examine, then those cameras would have been out there so that folks could understand what Bernie Sanders was talking about. But they may have liked that better than watching the empty stage waiting for the Donald to come out and compete. So your point is well taken. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question. What lessons in community organizing can you give to us? I'm sure they're in your book. What's your next book, and what's the next step? Because we've lost a lot of seats, a lot of power, a lot of small legislative positions and big ones.
Yeah, you look like you come from my generation. Yeah, you know that. You know that.
Dark shadows.
And
shadows.
Yes. The book is, my book is on 3 levels. Of course, it's a coming of age story. I tell my story, quote unquote. But it's also a political history of New York. And the third and most important thing that people give me credit for, it's a blueprint for how you organize. It's a blueprint for how you organize. I can't tell you in the time that we have what can be done, except to say, as I've said here tonight, we got to be thinking about how we're going to get people elected at the state level and at the county level. We need to do that. Young people can't just give away that level of power and say, well, that's not important. Because it is important. You see it's important now from all these things that these people are coming up with. All of this dark money and terrible ideas. So you got to learn how to fight this thing on many different levels. We fought the good fight in Newark to stop the medical school, for example, from taking 120 acres of land. We got them down to 60. We got 60 acres of land for our own housing development. We stopped the highway. I stopped the highway. Now I should say we, but it was my idea. I took a busload of white ministers and Black Panthers down to the State House, down to Trenton, and we closed the door. We locked the door, and the Panthers were all over the table. When we walked out 2 weeks later, they told me, Mr. Williams, we don't need to have that highway after all. You see, that was from organizing. Organizing is not just going out and have a demonstration. You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. You have to have good strategy. I'm just kind of rattling off some things right now because you asked that question. But this takes time. You can't do this if you're only going to be on Facebook. You can't do it if you're going to only talk about mobilizing as opposed to organizing. All of these are lessons that young people or not so young people need to learn, because we have gotten away from that. That's how we changed America. We can change America again. We're going to have to. Anybody else? And it will be a multiracial multi-class movement that does this. Has to be. Anybody else? Okay, I'll turn it back. Thank you.